author of the book that brings us together tonight, The Same Sky. So thank you so much for being here, for celebrating on behalf of her and everyone. This has been a journey. Talk about someone who's written a travel memoir, but literally journey through the process of writing a book, and talk about the vulnerability that it takes, the humanity that it takes to bring a personal story forward to share with all of us. To me, that's true courage, that's true humanity, and I think that speaks to the power of all of us together tonight in this room. So thank you for being a part of that. And also thank you to the Tibet House for hosting this tonight. It's an amazing space. I talked to a few people who do meditation here, how incredible. And I said, well, imagine now you can drink in the same room where you meditate. So there's wine in the back, there's food, please imbibe. This is a fun Friday night. And thank you again for being here. If any of you would like to live tweet, I'm a social media person, you can tag Debbie at Debbie, D-E-B-B-I-E-L-Y Wong, W-O-N-G on Twitter. That's at Debbie L-Y Wong. Y-L Wong. Y-L, thank you. Y-L Wong on Twitter, and maybe to all of you later. So, anyways, enjoy. And I'd like to introduce our author of the evening. We have others as well, but our special author, Debbie Wong. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming. I just want to ask if we have enough chairs, because it looks like there's a lot of people standing in the back, and because there's some chairs here. And Tashi, I'm wondering if we could bring out some extra chairs for people. Is that okay? Great. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, it's great to see so many people here. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled that you're all here. And actually, what's really interesting is that I recognize a lot of faces here. And I also recognize that so many of you come from far away, and that's fantastic, so thank you. And like Jennifer said, a special thank you to the Tibet House. And Tashi, who was just disappeared over there, us to have this event here. What a fantastic venue. In fact, for those of you who know, my book, The Same Sky, mostly takes place in Tibet, and I couldn't have asked for a better venue, so great big thank you to them. Okay, well, I want to tell you that around a few weeks ago, my husband Eduardo gave me this book, and it's a little travel notebook that has all these, cities that I've been to, and I'm very blessed because my job allows me to travel, which is great. And he said to me, oh, congratulations, your book launch is, just around the corner, and he said, welcome back. And I said, well, welcome back, I'm not going anywhere, And he said, no, you wrote this story many years ago when you were in Tibet, Laos, and Cambodia. And it's been a long journey for you, and so welcome back. And it's true, it's been a very long literary journey. I have to say that it's taken more than 10 years to write the book, and even longer to try to get published. So I'm just so thrilled that we've come to today, where we officially release the book to all of you. So I'm so thrilled that we can be able to share that. Unfortunately, I actually really like writing. I remembered when I was 5 or 6 years old, my mom had given me this small little brown colored diary, and she said, just write a few phrases. Just write a few phrases. And so I would write these little sentences that say things like, at 6 years old, I go to sleep, or I play, I'm like Ralph, little things that I would write. And to the present day today, where I'm currently still writing, and I've been able to combine both passion, traveling, and writing, and it's been great. I really enjoy it. In 1999, I was working as a Canadian expatriate in Beijing. And at that time, I was living together with a Frenchman. And at that time, he was the love of my life. And we were, going to get married, go to France, and have little French-Canadian babies and all that stuff. And he was everything that I had wanted at that time. He was fun, he was cool, he liked scuba diving, traveling. And then one day, he came home and he said it was over, just like that. And my whole world just crumbled. And it was really quite a sad time for me because when you build your whole life around somebody and then it just stops, it can be quite devastating. So I packed up my bags and I went traveling for 3.5 months by myself through Tibet, Laos, and Cambodia. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was the best thing that I ever did. And then shortly after that, I moved to New York in the year 2000. And when I moved here, I thought, you know what, I really want to tell my story. I want to share my story with other people who have gone through what I went through. And so what I did was I started writing on little cocktail napkins, notebooks. I even joined a memoir writing class, and some of our original members of that writing class are here tonight. And it started off as a little short story about the time that I was actually briefly detained in Tibet, to a full-fledged book. It's been such an epic journey this whole time. You should have seen my apartment in Queens. I had flip chart paper all around the room, character plot and development, and just so I could structure my writing. And like I said, it took over 10 years to write and a few more years to actually publish it and release it to all of you. So this is exciting, and well, the main objective tonight is to be able to share with you a little bit more about the book, The Same Sky, share a little bit more about me. We've also got other travel writers who will come up and share some of their pieces. So it's all good. There's also going to be a raffle drawing. Do all of you have a little coupon? Yeah? Cool. We've got some really cool prizes we're giving out. There's going to be some Q&A, and then finally at the end there will be a book signing. So thank you for all of you coming. I really appreciate it, and let's have a good evening. Great. Can everyone hear me okay up there?
Yes.
What? I have to. Okay. Great. Hold on. Okay. So, how many of you enjoy traveling? Raise your hand. Yeah. Wow, that's great. Well, that's good to know. You didn't like traveling then. No, I understand. But I'm glad you like traveling. One of the best things about traveling is not so much about seeing the monuments or temples that's nice too, but actually what's really nice about traveling are the heartfelt exchanges that you have with the local people. And that has just been such a powerful thing where you can go to a place like Tibet, where actually it's quite risky for them to talk to foreigners. And these people have opened up with me and shared their stories and their livelihood. And I think that's what makes traveling so beautiful, because you can actually get a sense as to where they are in their lives and what makes them happy or sad, and to be able to open up. And they welcome you in, they smile, they give you tea, and so it's great. So the reading that I'm going to share with you now is just a really brief story about when I was in Jokhang Monastery in Lhasa, Tibet, and I met a few monks, and they were just really lovely, and I just wanted to share this story with you. It's called Prayer Wheels. At the far end of the square, I stepped into Jokhang Monastery, which stood tall like a magnificent god with brilliantly colored robes that draped all along the sides with golden pillar tops. The noise from the streets dissipated except for the shuffling of feet and the prayer beads on people's wrists jingling with every motion forward. The warm flicker from the rows of candles met up to greet my face, dancing and swaying in sync with every Tibetan who would walk by. After perusing the chapel rooms, I sat cross-legged on a quiet spot on the rooftop and pulled out my Tibet travel guide to read about Jokhang Temple. A burgundy scarf covered my page, except it wasn't a scarf, but part of a robe belonging to the monk leaning over me. When his walnut eyes locked with mine, he stepped back and cautiously looked around. Then he tapped my book 3 times and grinned. His face was aged with time and experience, but his expressions were childlike. When I smiled back, he blinked excitedly behind the dinner plate glasses that seemed to smother his face. Several times he turned around and scanned the corridors, his long saffron robe flowing with each movement. but nobody was there. In broken Chinese, he asked where I was from. I hesitated. Would he believe me if I told him I was from Canada, even though I looked Chinese? Canada, I said. He nodded approvingly and his glasses slipped down below his nose. He pushed them back up with his fingers. 但是你不是中国人? So you aren't Chinese? I shook my head. I explained that my parents were from China, but immigrated to Canada where I was born and raised. His head tilted to the side to get a better look at me. I opened my money belt and gave him a Canadian flag pin. He paused and let it sit on his palm. He pulled the clasp and then proudly put it on his robe. Now that we were officially friends, he grabbed my guidebook. He flipped through it ravenously, as if he hadn't eaten in days. And somewhere in the pages, he would find food. What was he looking for? Out of their dark doorways, a few more monks appeared until finally a circle of them was jabbering in Tibetan like an excited sewing group. They pointed and tried to take the book away from my new friend while I looked on in confusion. A hushed silence overcame the chatter. My friend pointed at a tiny picture of the Dalai Lama. Each monk quietly took the book and lightly tapped the top of his head with a picture of their great leader. When the Dalai Lama fled Tibet in 1959, the Chinese government announced that anyone caught discussing or reading about the Dalai Lama would be subject to severe punishment. No wonder these monks were so intrigued by my book. Handing the book back to me, the monks bowed. Then, not knowing what to say next, they started to head back towards their living quarters. Wait, I said. I didn't want them to go. The kindness in their humble gestures and the endless respect they had for their exiled leader moved me. I didn't want the experience to end. Feeling brave, I flipped to the appendix in the back titled, Helpful Phrases. What's your name? I read out in Tibetan. My friend with the Canadian pin stepped forward and proudly said his name. One by one, my new friends introduced themselves. We practiced hello and thank you in both Tibetan and English, and each time they gave me the thumbs up sign. I graduated to more complex sentences from I am Canadian to where will you stay this evening if it rains? They thought these were outright silly and they laughed hysterically. After we had exhausted the phrases from the guidebook, I thanked the monks for their time and gave them each a Canadian flag pin. The bravest one, a shrunken fellow with hunched shoulders, asked me if I could help him pin it to his robe. Then he added, while pointing to the layer of fabric closest to his skin, near my heart, please. Fits of giggles later, we said our goodbyes and they disappeared behind the wooden doors that dotted the corridors. As the sun set later that day, its warm rays beaming down on the fluttering prayer flags strung between the posts, I visited the prayer wheels that surrounded the entire temple. Hundreds of brass wheels were perched on dusty wooden racks, row after row, with polished knobs at the base you could turn when walking past. It is believed that with each spin, your prayer flies upwards to heaven. However difficult or painful this journey will be, I will survive and get to the other side. I marched forward with one foot following the next. My right hand spun the prayer wheels, which whirred away, sending my message of healing to the skies. I'm sure some of you noticed there were prayer wheels downstairs, when you came in, and that's what I was referring to here today. So, thank you. We have another reader who's going to come up and share. So, hold on, I'm sorry. Yes, that is you. Guys, this is Ken. Can I just say, he is my awesome friend. Because we've known each other for 14 years, yeah, and we joined a memoir writing class in 2000, and we've been able to stay in touch all this time. So he's going to share with us a brief piece about what he's been writing.
Yeah, when we had our memoir class in 2000 and Debbie would read her pieces, I was just like, wow. And so this is such an honor to be at her book opening tonight. It's really amazing. Okay, my story takes place in Mali in December 2000. I traveled with a German friend of mine named Rollo, and we were backpacking there for a month. We met in Bamako, and we traveled west to a town called Kita. Most people go east, but we traveled west to start our trip. And our second stop was at a town called Manantali, And to get to Manantali, we ended up on a truck bed with so many people and so many wares that there was hardly room to stand for a 10-hour trip that was 100 kilometers long. So basically, you could have biked it quicker. But anyway, so this is when we get to Manantali at 2:30 in the morning. Okay, so at 2:30 in the morning, our truck belched to a stop in the town square, or rather circle, of Manantali. I jumped out of the bed of the truck, and Rollo handed me down the backpacks. I noticed the wiry Tuareg, who had stood by me most of the trip, was struggling with his butterscotch robes, cinnamon-colored headscarf, and sandals to get down. He had saved my ass several times during the trip by pulling away unseen strafing branches that were above the truck bed. So I put out my hands to help him. He passed me his prized walking stick that never left his grasp. When I handed it back to him after helping him down, he gave me a broad, yellow-stained smile before walking away into the night. I decided I liked the Tuaregs. They were so mysterious, so raiders of the lost ark, with their eyes glowing between their scarves. Standing in the dusty, quiet plaza, Rollo and I tried to figure our options. We had the name of a guy who lived here but no address. We saw no accommodations, and I didn't want to bed down by the truck like several passengers were doing, even though they only had thin blankets and we had sleeping bags. The few lights in the plaza were very bright, plus soon it would be loud as the locals woke up with the chickens and started the market. So Rollo and I decided to venture off into the square, or decided to venture off from the square and see what we could find. The first thing I noticed about Manantali was how unnoteworthy the town was. The buildings were all low-slung, mud brick affairs. I was trying to remember why we came here in the first place as we staggered in the blackness, exhausted, lost, and hungry. And then we spotted a light, and like two moths, we approached the flame. The two young guys, this light is really like not, I was expecting more light, so excuse me if I'm kind of. Okay, so two young guys were as surprised by the two white faces popping out of the dark as we were to see them. Bon nuit, I struggled with my French. They didn't know our contact name, nor of any hotel. The slow shake of their heads and lost looks were expected. Nevertheless, I was feeling panicked. Well, is there any place we can just lay down until the morning, I asked? One guy, Karim, thought a bit, then said quickly, suivez-moi. We followed him to the end of the dirt road, through some tall dry grass, down another road until we saw a bar surrounded by a few bungalows. Karim pointed to the concrete benches covered with old cushions and chairs, and metal chairs, then disappeared into the night. It was chilly out. I didn't like the idea of sleeping in the open. What if some robber came in the night? I only had cash on me, no credit cards, and no plan B. We decided to sleep in shifts. Rollo was swaying on his feet, so I decided to sleep first. Or I decided to let him sleep first. I put on my coat and sleeping bag and kept guard. Whenever I shut my eyelids, I'd hear a branch crack or some strange monkey howl, just like in the movies, and my bloodshot eyes would open again. At one point, I did drift to sleep. I know this because I was suddenly ripped out of a dream by a thunderous, confusing noise rumbling nearby. It sounded like a train engine. In the distance, I could see dust being kicked up by a line of blurry, fast-moving animals. Holy shit! Is this like a herd of trumpeting elephants? Grunting wildebeests? Cantankerous hippos? Were we in danger of being trampled to death? When I finally found my damn glasses in my backpack and put them on, I saw that the stampede horde was 10 donkeys running down a nearby road. If only I had photographed Roland's expression when he woke out of a deep sleep and the donkeys had run off. The nocturnal sounds, dogs barking, donkeys braying, birds chirping, roosters crowing, lulled me to sleep when I again was awoken. This time it was by a wide-eyed, slight black man holding a staff before me. At 4 a.m., after not sleeping for 20 hours and being almost crushed to death by a herd of stampeding elephants or mildly aroused honking donkeys, my French was failing me. The guy shook his head vigorously when I asked if we could sleep here. We started to collect our things, then motioned towards the vacant-looking bungalows behind us. Could we sleep in one of them? Sheepishly, he nodded his head. How much? He paused a moment, then he blurted out, 5,000 sequin. That worked out to $5 a piece. Pricey and Molly, but we took it. The outside looked much better than the inside, which was dusty and unswept. There were 2 single bed frames that held rotting mattresses or torn sheets, but anything was better than sleeping outside in the elements with the elephants. We didn't bother to take off our clothes. We just slid into our sleeping bags on top of the disgusting mattresses. Before we passed out from exhaustion, Rollo murmured in his slight German accent, and the royal family, upon arriving in Menantili, is escorted from their gold-leaf carriage by state ministers to their royal suite, where they find feather beds and satin pillows stuffed with the softest of down. Juxtaposing the picture Rollo just painted with our actual and current, with our actual sad current conditions made me erupt in laughter. The more I thought of his regal portrayal of our trip and how we traveled like cattle in that truck for 10 hours, and now we're pinned up in these shabby digs, sleeping on flop beds like 2 bums, the more I laughed. Tears were streaming down my cheeks. I hadn't laughed so hard in years. It felt good to laugh at first. All the stress I built up regarding this trip melted away, but I couldn't stop laughing. I hoped Rollo realized the exhaustion was the reason behind my hysterical chortling, but then I feared he might think I'm crazy because I was fearing the same thing. I tried to rein in my laughter. I tried not to think of Rollo and the royal hobos. But little paroxysms of tittering kept on escaping from me like Chief Inspector Dreyfus on Pink Panther after Inspector Clouseau drives him insane. Finally, I drifted off to sleep, and with the thoughts of the royal family in Menantili on my mind. Thank you.
Always so colorful whenever we hear and read. Very nice. I'd like to introduce you to my friend Paul here. And Paul and I have known each other also for 14 years because the 3 of us were in the same writing class way back when. And I've asked Paul to come and co-read a piece with me. Can everyone hear me okay? Before we start, I wanted to share with you that what I find really interesting about Tibet is that no matter where you go, the people's dedication to their religion is just everywhere. You see prayer flags thrown across the rooftops, you see stupas in every town, and you see the most amazing pilgrims who come around and they circumambulate the templary. What they do is they bring their hands together and they touch their forehead, their hearts, and then they actually bend all the way down and then come back up. And it's amazing to see this process of falling and then getting back up, and falling and getting back up, which I think is rather symbolic of where I was at that time with my journey, where I was feeling really down and then wanting to feel uplifted again. One thing I want to share with you is that my driver, Nima, he used to say to me, I don't care if this was obviously during the Chinese occupation. I don't care if my monastery is taken away. I don't care if I don't have the, if things are taken away from me. You can take away my religion, but you can't take away what beats in my heart. And it was just really fascinating that he would talk so, fervently about that. And so this piece talks a little bit about how during that time when I was feeling really down about this breakup, there were all these things around me going on that were, really inspiring and encouraging.
Yeah, man, just as a little joke, I was on the bus coming up here from Philly, and Debbie was sending me back and forth things about tonight. And this one came in. She said, "I'm excited you're coming. I'm so stressed. I need a pep talk from you. I've waited my whole life for this day, and I'm scared and excited and nervous." And all I could send back was, "Get up, fall down, get up."
How poignant. Yes, definitely. Very nice. Okay. After visiting Jokham Temple, I stepped out into the sunlight and meandered through the square, making my way back to the hostel. Internet cafe. The words leaped out at me. Could it be that the isolated rooftop of Asia is finally connected to the World Wide Web? Like a cowboy setting foot in a saloon for the first time, I stepped into Barker Cafe. I logged onto a computer, and as I scrolled down, my heart suddenly began to thump. A message from Christoph, my ex-boyfriend. Even with the mouse poised and ready, I couldn't click on the message. What could he have to say to me after our last bitter conversation? With one swoop of my index finger, his message flashed before me.
Hello. I'm writing to tell you that I'm sorry about our last phone call. I didn't mean for you to find out about my new girlfriend like that. You had meant so much to me during our 2 years together, but it wouldn't have worked. I can't explain why. Nor can I explain about why there's a new person in my life shortly after you. All I can say is that this is how I feel now, and it can't be helped. Maybe one day we can go for a coffee and catch up. Yeah. Kisses.
My stomach muscles twisted like a wet dish towel being wrung dry. I touched my burning cheeks and winced as each of his words leaped from the screen to slap me.
I didn't mean for you to find out about my new girlfriend like that.
It took every ounce of energy to stand up. I grabbed my backpack.
I can't explain why. It can't be helped.
I thumped around for some loose bills in my money belt.
We should go for coffee and catch up.
I blindly dropped some cash on the computer keyboard and stumbled out the door. "Girlfriend," I shouted at the darkening sky. "You don't just trade years of intimacy only to commit to a girl you picked up at a nightclub." Beside the cafe stood a cement wall, and I rested my forehead against it, my hands covering my ear as if to shut out the noise in my head. I'd been replaced by some no-name chick he met at a bar. Then I slammed both fists against the wall again and again. I sat down in the middle of the sidewalk amid the flow of Tibetans passing by me. Maybe I'm not meant to understand everything, and maybe I should just get over him and move on. But how could I move on when it still hurts so much? The next morning, when the sun peeked over the horizon, my friends and I left Lhasa and had started heading west to Nepal. During our drive to the next town, we noticed that the dwellings in the countryside were often shanties made of mud or concrete. A couple of times, we stopped in the little towns to use the bathroom or have a meal, and I was often struck by the impoverished conditions. No electricity or running water, and malnourished people in tattered clothing. But in every town, I noticed there was always a place of worship, whether it was a stupa or a set of prayer wheels. Then for the first time, I raised a sensitive question to our Tibetan driver, Nima. "Do you think people up here in the countryside get enough to eat?" Nima sighed and spoke in a tired voice. "Why do you want to know? I'm not supposed to talk about these things. I can get fired and have trouble on my family." He was right. Even though we were miles away from any major city and driving through a vast open country, police checkpoints were everywhere. Any one of us could let something slip. I could understand his paranoia. But I was persistent. "Nima, I promise I won't breathe a word to anyone while I'm here." He stared ahead. There's enough to eat in Lhasa or any of the major towns where the biggest concentration of the Chinese live. In the smaller towns, they ration the barley, rice, everything, so everyone's supposed to get enough to eat. I pressed on. Since the Chinese have come in, they've helped build schools, pave the roads, and tried to make it better, right? And so what, he roared.
Big deal that the Chinese tried to civilize us. We were fine, just fine before they came. Nima gripped the steering wheel so tightly and began driving faster as our Land Cruiser bumped over the uneven ground. He shook his head. When you leave Tibet, tell everyone. The world needs to know the injustice, the unfairness of our poor country. If you speak up, you get shot. If you write a letter, your family goes to jail. If you try to escape the country, you get killed. We've done our fighting. Hundreds of Tibetans have been persecuted, jailed, and killed. And I have a family now. I can't afford to stand up for my rights when so many depend on my income. You can't win. Then he turned towards me, his eyes warm. Mayo Bangfa, it can't be helped. I was speechless. He continued. They've taken so much away, almost all our temples, monasteries, sometimes even our right to practice our religion freely. But one thing's for sure, you can't destroy the Tibetan passion and fervor for our religion. They can't take away what makes my heart beat. Sometimes it's so hard to simply live and survive here. You learn to accept it. Mayo Bangfa, this is life now, and if you hold on to your anger, it will destroy you. I tell you, if it weren't for my faith, I'd be dead. Sure, we want our Dalai Lama to come back, and I believe one day he will, but when he does, it'll never be the way it was before. We are forever changed. When the sun did the final stretch across the horizon, we arrived finally in Jeonse. That afternoon, when I was taking a break, I sat on the steps of the main chapel and observed Tibetans walking their kora, or ritually circumambulating the prayer circuit. I stared down at my own hands. They were bruised and scratched from the night before. It took me a second as I remembered how I pounded the wall with my fist after I read Christoph's email.
I'm so sorry about our last phone call.
When I looked up from my hands, I focused on an old woman following the kora, using her entire body to prostrate herself at every step on the circuit, which only the serious pilgrims did. She joined her hands together and then touched her forehead, mouth, and heart before stretching her entire body on the ground with the arms extended out.
My new girlfriend. I can't explain why. It can't be helped.
Then she stood up gracefully, one step ahead of where she had been before, and dropped to the ground again. Her hands were bloodied and caked in mud. I watched for several minutes as she continued to perform her ritual prostration of repeatedly falling and getting up. Nima's words hung in the air.
It can't be helped. This is life now. And if you hold on to your anger, it destroys you.
The woman was still slowly but tirelessly moving along with the rest of the pilgrims on the circuit. Over and over again, she fell to the ground and got up. Fall, get up, fall, get up.
Thanks, Paul. Our next reader is someone I just met actually this year, Rebecca Kelly. Come on up. I met Rebecca through a friend of a friend at my workplace, APCO. And I have to say, Rebecca is awesome because not only is she an amazing writer, but she helped me with social media. And for those of you authors out there, it's really tough being able to crack that nut of social media, Twitter, Instagram, all that. And Rebecca has been fabulous in helping me out. Now, before I turn over the mic, I see some people standing. There are some chairs here. So, please, perhaps you're more than welcome to come over and have a seat. Okay, so Rebecca, take it away.
All right. So, I was first working on a piece that I thought was funny at least, but I woke up on Wednesday morning and my piece was too long and I was like, I'll write about death. So, unfortunately, good, I'm glad you laughed. Unfortunately, you guys are stuck with a little bit of a sad story. It's, our protagonist is also sort of a reluctant traveler. I think when you think about travel, it's important also to think about the people who are afraid of rootlessness and who are afraid of finding new places and what that might do to them, that dislocation. The story is dedicated to my grandmother because she says she cannot understand my New York accent. I will be reading this in her preferred form of speech. This is the Devil's Share. Ma, this is our stop. It was a balding man saying this. He looked like Rooster. Ma, I got your purse. Do you want help? No, it was her son, Mark. Where am I going? We're in Kentucky, Ma, at a whiskey distillery. You keep saying you want to go home, so... Home? Where's my front porch? My furniture? Ma, Slogan's gone, you know that. Remember, I thought this place would remind you? That's just what her sons didn't understand. Travel was no good. Ruth always needed her things. Ada's portrait, Father's pipe, Aunt Tilly's crochet couch covers to give her the electric shock of memory that told her who she was. Ruth followed her nose. It wasn't quite Slogan, but the good whiskey called up Brewster and Father instantly. Ma, you sit here, I'll get you a drink. She relaxed into the sense cushion. Father met Brewster back when they worked at the mine together, and after Prohibition ended and Father couldn't live off Slogan bourbon anymore, Ruth would tiptoe behind him after their shift, watching Brewster's shoulders flex when he stewed pea farley. It was a good thing she watched too. Father died when she was 18 for reasons her mother never disclosed, but that she could more or less guess. Ruth and Brewster rushed to marriage so he could run Slogan bourbon, and their sons Mark and Little Mackie came out one right after the other like two bright drips out of the spigot. Her sons didn't know this, but Brewster drank the devil's share. All the alcohol that evaporated naturally in the barrel was the angel's share, so sent up to the heavens in vapor. But the devil's share was the liquor the men drank off the top and blamed on the angels. It was sip after dozing sip for Brewster, but Ruth picked up the slack. She learned that she already knew everything she needed to know. Her nose knew when the ethanol was burned out, and her hands could sense the right temperature for the fire. It wasn't exactly woman's work, but nothing in the mountains was. She was good at it anyway. Devil made your hands to brew a bottle of pleasure for him, Brewster would say, and Ruth loved this new way of looking at her hands. And now she just needed to go home. One look at her reflection in the brassy backroom furnace, and she'd see all the secrets she'd forgotten revealed to her. Irish style, double malt, just how you like it, Mom. This was Mark. Mark looked like an old fat rooster. Brewster never lasted 6 winters. In the summer, he could come and go from his infidelities, and it didn't matter, only Ruth knew. But in the Appalachian winter, the boys could see his nighttime snow prints. Don't come back if you leave, Ruth warned, and he didn't. Hey, Mom, what you thinking? Mark wouldn't be quiet. Where was Little Mackie? That boy knew how to maintain silence. She needed Little Mackie anyway. She wanted to tell the boys something about their father. At least they knew about Roscoe, though. Everyone knew about Roscoe, her third husband, who always took the devil's share. He crashed a truck on a delivery to Ada's store 2 towns over. Ruth made sure they buried him with 2 barrels instead of just the traditional one, since she thought he'd want more with him. Everyone got buried with a barrel, even Rooster. Sure, Rooster just walked off into the white one night, but Ruth always preferred a burial. It was easier when she could put a wound in the earth and watch the springtime heal it back up, because some holes were too hard for her to fill without the help of something big like the earth. Little Mackie got his devil's share too, decades ago. That's where Little Mackie was. He drank himself into a self-made grave before he even married, and when Ruth found out, she made sure she went to his apartment alone so that she could protect anyone else from the unpleasantries. She found a notebook and dozens of balloons taped on the walls. He wrote that he spent 1 hour each day collecting his breath of balloons. They were arranged in little lines, growing steadily deflated. Turns out I can't even hold on to my breath, he wrote. And then he stole himself away from her. Ruth hid the balloons since they seemed a little indecent, but she held on to his last one, still swollen with breath and cigarette smoke. She never explained why, but she made sure they held off on his funeral until that balloon got wrinkled and deflated like his body should have. Ma, you okay? Here, drink some water. I got you some. Ruth took a sip of her bourbon, and the taste of her own devil's share flooded back into her. Things were starting to go really good for them then at Slogan's Bourbon. It wasn't quite Father's Prohibition days, but Ruth was good at pushing under the counter. Her customers knew her and came to count on her. People waved, and she was even making special barrels for the police chief, so she was feeling pretty confident. But then, when was it that she got that court notice? Ruth didn't know anymore, but she knew it was eminent domain, a phrase she'd never forget that meant the government was taking her land to build a highway. The night before move-out with all the furniture and family silver and pictures and frames and boxes, Ruth and her boyfriend Sonny took out to the distillery. Ruth tasted from the first barrel she came upon, and too tired to care, she named it her devil's share right then and there. And then she took a last look at herself in the copper wares her great-granddaddy built, and she set to prying apart the last batch of Slogan bourbon there never would be. Ma, I'm calling Dr. Ruskin, stay there. The whole county came out with their trucks to help her move barrels. and the thin line sneaking down the highway looked like a nighttime funeral procession. They deposited the barrels in the basement of her new home, and that was that. Ma, can you put your coat on? Dr. Ruskin says I need to take you home. Home? Who's home? The wretched home outside the city, where the walls were seeped with the smell of a bourbon she couldn't make anymore? Sonny sunk himself barrel after barrel, too. That's where they all went, sunk under the weight of their devil share. Ruth turned her eyes to the liquid in her cup and saw her reflection in the image of the liquor. She looked so much older than she remembered. She always considered Sloan Bourbon her accomplice, the one who made her the boss, who put her in charge and made her successful. But now she wondered, what had the bourbon ever given her other than a roster of dead loved ones? That was the secret hiding in the reflection of her granddaddy's brassy wares. She'd been the devil's accomplice all along. Ma, goodness, don't be sad. I'm so sorry. I was just trying to cheer you up. Who was this man brushing her cheek with wet fingers? She didn't know him. Was it Rooster? Father? She took another swig to make sense of it all, and when she looked up again, she saw them. Little Mackie and Rooster and Father and Lewin and Roscoe and Sonny, and that man in the middle was her son, Mac. Little Mackie raised a finger to his lips so she wouldn't spill their secret, and Ruth had to suppress a girl's giggle. Her men were always so cunning, so sly. Little Mackie took his brother's hand and guided him invisibly in the right direction. She looked over and saw Father and Rooster. They were holding her barrel. Those two were always thick as thieves. They probably drunk most of it if they could carry it, but she didn't even mind. They were holding it just right so she could pull the cork out and take a dram. She did it so subtly, Mac didn't even notice. And once she took her drink, her men turned towards her and whispered, Ruthie, we're going home.
Isn't she great? Very, very well written. So, one of the nicest things about traveling is you really don't have to be anybody. You can be a nobody. And in our current society, we are linked to who we are in terms of your family, your ties to work, and all that. And so I find it really refreshing when I'm traveling because I could be anybody I want to be. And when you're currently working and all that, you're somebody's coworker. I'm somebody's coworker. I'm somebody's stepmother now. I'm somebody's wife. I'm somebody's daughter. And so when we're tied to these strong ties of identity, these can be really hard to get pulled away. And that's why sometimes when traveling, you can just be whoever you want to be. This next reading takes place in Cambodia. When I was in Cambodia, I had an accident. And this woman took me in, and it was amazing because she didn't care about who I was or where I was from or anything like that. And I just found that to be so nice because it's nice to just not have to explain who I am or and all that. So these little small acts of kindness were very important to me when I was traveling and helping me in my journey. It's called Blank Identity. I was coming back by a rickety pedicab. I was parched because I hadn't had a drink of water in several hours. Then, disaster began to slowly unfold. First, the rain. Light, soft, refreshing dabs of moisture in the beginning, and then heavier, frantic drops. The pedicab driver scanned the darkening clouds and sped up his pedaling along the uneven road. In his haste, he turned too quickly and missed a gigantic pothole that threw us both into the mud. I skidded across the pavement with my palms out until I came to a full stop. A large flap of skin from my hand waved in the wind. I painfully discarded it. My head throbbed. I wiped my forehead. The wetness was not sweat, but blood. Then I saw the real damage. The rickshaw was on its side like a fallen horse, its steel wheel tick-ticking away to a slow stop. The driver tried to resurrect it, but the wheel was bent. Then, thunder and gusty winds. A tropical storm was coming. The heavens poured down, and soon puddles morphed into rivers down the road. The rain came down so hard that the drops jumped back up, soaking my clothes and backpack. Everything weighed me down as I trudged through the street. I shielded my eyes from the pelting drops for several minutes. The driver was nowhere to be seen, and neither was the pedicab. I couldn't duck in anywhere. People had closed up shops, and the streets were deserted. I pounded on a door, but all I saw at the window were darting eyes, and then the curtains. I staggered down the street for several minutes, feeling absolutely miserable. The roads remained empty. With my head bent, I made my way as if in the dark to a large tree and crouched underneath it. Wrapping my arms around my knees, I hunkered down, my body shielding my face. I waited for the storm to pass. Touch! A hand appeared. I raised my face a little, the drop stinging my skin. I squinted. Someone was pulling me down a narrow alleyway, then through a wooden doorway with only the person's sandals ahead of me. I staggered aimlessly, the woman's steady hand guiding me through the storm. She only had to unlatch the hook and the wind jerked the door open. My eyes adjusted to the darkness in the room. A little boy sat cross-legged in the corner. The woman whispered to the little boy, who immediately left and then came back a moment later with a hand towel moistened with warm water. She dabbed it on my forehead, then showed me the pinkness at the tip. I had been bleeding. She then patted my scraped palms as I stood there, unmoving, yet moved by her kindness. The whole time she cared for my wounds, she didn't speak, not a word. She stood before me and hesitated for a second. Then she disappeared and reemerged with a towel and some fresh dried clothes for me to change into. She filled a small teacup with hot water from the black kettle, and I drank one cup right after the other. My thirst quenched and my body dried and warm, I finally relaxed in my new clothes. The woman was now across the room, ironing. Who was she? Her clothes were very plain, her house even plainer. Blank walls and a large table with only 2 chairs, enough to accommodate herself and one other person. Was she married? I tried to introduce myself, tell her my name, but she paid no heed. She only nodded in my general direction. She kept ironing. Every once in a while, she refilled my teacup and then went back to her ironing. This was so strange. Not once did she raise an eyebrow about my cuts and scrapes, nor did she ask me for my name, my race, or my background. I felt relief. To be a nobody comforted me. I wouldn't need to explain my identity, my race, my marital status, my job, my existence. I felt so free. I wasn't tied to anyone. I didn't have to answer to anyone else. Sometimes people would ask me where I was from and they weren't satisfied with my answer until I revealed my ethnic culture. Where are you from? Canada. No, really, where are you from? I'm from Canada. Well, you look, yeah, my parents are from China. Oh, okay. Then the nod and the conversation could continue. People are often defined by their partner, work status, and family. I once visited my father's village in Guangzhou province, a village of 200 people. When I introduced myself, the villagers gawked at me in confusion. Who was this well-fed Asian person with a funny accent, and what was she doing in this backwater village? It was only when I wrote the Chinese character of my family name in the sand and repeatedly uttered my father's name that they welcomed me. "Nine Jones' second daughter's here!" someone yelled to a farmer out in the field. He then hollered that same message to the next field until my father's relative in the far distance ran in to greet me. From then on, I was referred to as Nine Jones' second daughter. No one asked me for my name. It wasn't necessary. I was defined by my relationship to my father. And for many years, living in China, I realized my identity was always tied to something or somebody. I was tied to my company who sponsored my working visa. I was Christoph's live-in girlfriend. I couldn't go anywhere without other expatriates asking about where I was from and my ties to the foreign community. So when Christoph and I split up, I felt my identity was stripped from me. I had believed my ties to him and the expatriate community created my identity. And amazingly enough, even months after the breakup, I still felt the power of my ties to him. The rain had finally stopped, and when the sun came out, the streets of Phnom Penh glistened for several minutes before it was dry again. It was hard to believe that such a heavy storm had just passed through. The woman had finished ironing and rested beside me with a teacup nestled in her palm. We sat in comfortable silence as we gazed outside, watching the streets come alive again. Perhaps she was thinking the same thing I was, that we weren't that different from each other, human beings in need of a little company. Maybe she shared the same ideas, that we are not defined by a man, culture, race, or even a political regime. I was a person just like her, and that the one commonality we shared was being at the same place at the same time. It was these small acts of generosity throughout my trip that showed me how people were bound together, that moved along my suffering heart to peace. The sky darkened and the rain started again, the pitter-patter echoing once more on the roof. The woman poured another cup of tea for me, and I smiled my thank you to her. She nodded. After all, we were just 2 women drinking tea in a small wooden shop, wondering if the rain would stop soon, and at the same time, not caring if it did. Thank you. Our next reader is a gentleman named Atif, and come on up. He's a really good friend of mine. I joined a writing group in 2000, and then joined the second writing group in I think 2009, 10. And Atif and 5 other people were part of that group. And Atif is a wonderful writer, and I'm so happy that he could share a little bit about himself and also what he wrote.
Yeah, we actually started a small mini writer circle after that, which actually led me to realize that I could actually even write a little poetry and haiku of talent that I thought I never had. So I wanted to thank Debbie for inviting me, and it's really an honor to be able to speak here. The piece that I've written is, I grew up, I'm originally from Pakistan, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah. And at about age 17, I decided to pen a little memoir. Unfortunately, it's nowhere near the level of this publishing. But as I wrote the memories of my childhood and the things that we did and what we did when we were growing up, last year I had the opportunity to go back to Jeddah and visit some of the old places. And I wanted to reflect back, so this piece is written as sort of a memory and dedication. I did want to thank my lovely wife who provided some very much needed input, and her touch helped form this piece, or otherwise we just mere ramblings. So here it goes. We are ascending into the night sky. I'm glued to the window, watching the lights fade far below. I spot the green fountain and corniche out west. My eyes dart towards Medina Road, stretching it far into the east. When will I return, I wonder? Will I ever return? I press against the window harder and try to take one last look. I make out the shoreline and lights of downtown, and just then, the late autumn clouds obscure my view. I'm leaving Jeddah, the city where I grew up. I'm 17 years old. Look, look, it's Jeddah, my new friend in 11B shouts excitedly as he points out the window. He has just learned that I'm returning to visit Jeddah after 17 years. For the past hour, we have been joyously sharing the stories of our city, my family's adopted home, and his ancestral. My father's cousin picks me up the next morning. Last time we met, I was still in college, and his kids were only crawling about. We reminisce about that day. We remember my late father. He plans to drive me around all my old stomping grounds during my weekend-long stay here. I am about to relive 17 years in 72 hours. I feel giddy. I feel overwhelmed. I feel 17 all over again. My first memory of the city is in 1977. It was a small, dark town with unpaved roads. I remember standing at an intersection. Our house was nearby. After dropping our luggage, my father and I walked to the neighborhood store for some groceries. I was holding his hand, taking in this new place that would be our home. We are driving on that same road, going to see the house I grew up in. I see that little boy walking to the store. I remember him. I visualize the buildings he was looking at, and I try to find them amid the new houses, the paved roads, and parked cars. The buildings, the grocery store, our house, so much of my city has changed. The dark intersection is now a multi-level highway. The vast empty pit nearby is a 20-building complex. Yet the only thing different about my house is a paint job and a railing on the stoop. The neem tree at the corner still shades the scorched pavement. The muezzin at the neighborhood mosque calls out for prayers in the same minaret. The bakery where I got naans every day hasn't gone anywhere. My dark, unpaved town is now a metropolis of 3.5 million people. Yet my house looks as fresh and sane as the memory of my 3-year-old brain. We drive up onto this road towards the Red Sea. Soon we are at our first roundabout. Ah, the roundabouts. Jeddah didn't just build roundabouts, it built monumental roundabouts. We passed the Meshkiza, built to honor the people who sold water out of cool vases when Jeddah was still nothing but a small trading post. Over the next hour, we passed by the fishing boats, perched on concrete walls emulating surfs. Earth, moon, and the sun engaged in their celestial dance. The very first plane ever to land in Jedda's airport. And Adam's bicycle, the unfathomably large and creepiest bicycle I've ever seen. We stopped for Friday prayers at the floating mosque on the Red Sea shore. I remember our monthly outings to the beach, at night, and fully clothed. This is Saudi Arabia. I remember football on the beach, ice cream lines at the corner stand, picnics in the huts, and theme parks on Eid night. We stopped for lunch at El Bayt, of course, the iconic fast food chain started by our city's very own. There's a 45-minute wait and a line out the door. A KFC and a McDonald's is across the street, empty. We all stand in line and patiently wait for our turn. An hour to get fast food chicken seems perfectly reasonable when you're at El Bayt. 3 days have gone by and I'm still waiting to catch my breath. The journey through time is at its end. What makes this trip so precious is not the driving of the monuments, but rather reading in the 17 years that I shared with my family and friends. The houses, the roads, and the roundabouts are simply physical markers that remind me of the personal connections, which still bind me to this place. Adam's bicycle would be meaningless if it did not direct us to my uncle's house every Thursday night for family picnic. The airplane at the intersection would be just another random roundabout if turning right did not mean spending the day with my friends and getting my hands scratched at the game of FC football and winning the game, of course. Over the last 3 days, the family friends who are still here remind me of those cherished memories, double dinner bookings, arguments between friends over who gets to drive me around, so many gifts that I had to buy an extra suitcase. I have relived countless weekends and recalled even more conversations. And with them, I have recreated memories of every connection, relationship, and friendship. I allow myself to be 17 for one more time, glued to the window, watching the lights fade far below. The Green Fountain and the Medina Road look as familiar as they did that night. But there are new landmarks to spot: the 100,000-seat stadium, the sprawling shopping mall, the soon-to-be tallest building in the world. I press against the window harder and try to take one last look. And just then, the late autumn clouds were still many.
This is a letter from the teacher, Michael Kay, who taught us that writing class in 1991.
No, 2000.
2000. One image I have to offer you, really. When I see Debbie, I think she should be wearing rollerblades. Because when we finished the class, we used to meet for a year or two later at some pizza parlor up in the Upper West Side, and she would come up on rollerblades. This is the teacher. Almost 14 years ago, I had the distinct pleasure of teaching a very special and talented group of students in my first writing class for Gotham Writers Workshop in New York City. The bond that formed amongst that group was stronger and more significant than any workshop that I would teach subsequently. Amid this remarkable group of individuals and writers, Debbie Wong presented a life story that took us to places most of us had never been. Now Debbie has arrived in a place most people have never been. She stuck with her dream to write, complete, and publish her memoir. While few students ever actually finish a draft of their book, even fewer publish. Debbie has done both. It is such an honor for me as a writing teacher to see Debbie transform herself from writer to author. I am very proud of Debbie's tenacity and of her writing itself. I hope all of you will allow yourself the pleasure of going on a profound journey of transformation with her by reading The Same Sky, sharing it with others who also share the same sky as you. Michael Kay, Oakland, California. And I'll give a shameless pitch. Sometimes it's hard to find your voice. Excuse me for saying this, but especially in the Catholic Church. I'm a Catholic priest, and oftentimes women and nuns and gay people and even gay priests feel like we've got sort of like a muffled around heart. I wrote a book called The Black Wall of Silence. It's just about done. I'm going to leave this card here if anybody wants to pick it up. Here's the theme. Father Zach, a gay prison chaplain, is caught between loyalty to his brotherhood of Catholic priests and his integrity to report the cover-up of sexual abuse in the church. It's coming. On the website with a blog, we'd love to hear you jump in with your questions. I'll leave these around.
Yes, thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Yes, up here, if anyone would like. Great. So, a couple things I want to say. Paul is so wonderfully modest. Yes, I did show up in my rollerblades a couple of times. You know, we were trying to meet. Actually, what's really interesting is that one of the ways that I was able to finish my book was that myself and Paul and Ken and a couple other members, we met every 2 weeks on the Upper West Side to have dinner, and we exchanged our chapters with each other. We did this religiously every other week for 2 years, and I was able to finish my book as a result of that. And you know, I love that authors can exchange ideas and give each other feedback, and you have to do that. Otherwise, you end up being too solitary. So, Ken, who was reading earlier, and Paul, thank you so much for always being there for me. You've been such a wonderful support. Thank you. We're going to do something fun. We're going to have a raffle, but before we do, I want to call out a couple of things. Oh, just a second. So, yeah, we're going to do a raffle because I realize that, you know, it's always fun to give out little gifts and things like that. But before we do, I want to point out a couple of things. There are people here in this room that I haven't seen in like 10 years or 12 years. And there are people that have come really far away to join us. And I want to call out a few people here. Paul, Father Paul, who came all the way from Philly for this. My friend Dwight, here from Philadelphia. That's great. All the way from Washington, D.C., my former and current colleagues from my company, Elena, Arlene, Miguel, Abby, Katie, Lynn, Laurel, Thompson, and Stacy Ryan, all the way from North Carolina. And guys, she told me not to embarrass her, but I will. Jennifer Malcolm, if you could stand up, she's my best friend, flew all the way from Vancouver for this. Also, my friend John McKay, there he is, yeah, flew all the way from Prince Edward Island, and he's actually in my book. I met him, and we traveled through Laos together, so he's here. I also want to point out somebody, Betty Ying. She is someone who traveled with me to Tibet. We were both Chinese-Canadian, Chinese-American, working in China together. And it's so fun. We kind of lost touch for 8 years. And last week we had dinner together. And I told her over dinner, guess what? I wrote a book. You're in my book. So I'm so thrilled that she's here today as well. And yeah, so definitely didn't mean to embarrass you. So, and also obviously all of you coming out here, this is fabulous. We've got a couple more things. We've got a raffle, and then we're going to do Q&A, and then one last reading, and then the book signing. So Jennifer, if you could come up, she's going to help me do the raffle. Everyone have a raffle coupon? Okay, most of these gifts that I got are Tibetan related, Buddhist related, some of these books. And John McCabe from Prince Edward Island graciously and generously also threw in some prizes from Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island t-shirts, aprons, like really cool stuff. So we're giving those away too. Okay, first, book on Dalai Lama. Look at this. Okay. Mary, 1027. Come on up. Yeah. Yeah, if you could come up, that would be great. Okay. 1048 and 1069. Yeah. 1064. Come on. Oh, good, good, good. 1052. Yeah. 1060. Check out this awesome book on Buddhism. Woo! Great. Check out this awesome book on Buddhism. Beautiful. 1075. Yes. 1054. Look on Tibet. Yeah, great. Great. 1036. Woohoo!
I feel like what you're doing.
1035. Renee, 1035, yes. This is a great little what I should pack when I'm traveling. 1005, Ron Richardson.
Ron!
Where did we go?
Bubbles on.
We'll take it.
We'll take it. Did I take it? Okay. This is really cool. These are honey drops from Prince Edward Island. They're honey candy. So 1076. Check out this apron. No, I'm so generous. Oh my God. Look at that. Very nice. You can model it. 1055. 1055? Going? 1025, Christina. 1045. Look at this t-shirt. 1073. 1073. Maybe have one of you.
She's gonna put it over to that.
1051. Karen. Oh, 1016. My friend Sean, is he here? Great! Got a t-shirt. And I love this one. 1029, Eddie Rivera. Where are you, Eddie? This is a good friend of mine. We used to bike together. We used to competitively bike together. He was on our team, so great to see you. T-shirt for you. And that's our raffle. Thank you. We're going to do a couple more things. We're going to do a quick Q&A, and then a final reading, and then we're done with the book signing. we will open it up to the audience and answer any questions you may have. So go ahead and start.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. Congratulations again, Debbie. This is a huge accomplishment to have written and published a book. I've known Debbie for a long time, over 20 years, so I feel like I've known her since before she started writing the book, but it's been really fascinating listening to the progress of this book, and I'm so happy to be here. And I encourage anyone who hasn't read the book to read it, because it's an excellent book on many levels, but it's just a beautiful story. Debbie's very talented, so I encourage everybody to read the book. So I was going to get things started with a couple questions, but I think I see already somebody has their hand up, so it looks like there's some other questions in the audience, and we'll just answer as many as we have time for. So, yeah, I'll start with the ones. I'll get to you. So I have a couple questions for Debbie. So what I was interested in is, because I remember when you started to write the book in 2000, I wondered how the process of writing a memoir went for you as you got further away from the trip. So the trip happened in 1999.
Yeah.
It was about a 12-year process in writing the book. So in terms of the memoir, how did the process feel the further away you got from it? And how did the memories change, and how was can you talk a bit about that?
Okay. So it's interesting because even though I went on my trip in 1999, it took me 10 years to write it. And even though shortly after that I moved here to New York, I don't think if I had quit my job and I suddenly became a full-time writer, I don't think I would have been able to write it. Because writing is an evolutionary process. And I remembered when I first moved here, I was really quite lonely. I had started working at a hotel company and I didn't know a soul. So I went from this amazing trip to, working in New York and not knowing anyone. And some of that loneliness I kind of had to feel for myself and go through that. And most importantly, I felt like I couldn't write the story until I felt better about myself. In the story, it was complicated because it was more than just a breakup. I'm not going to give it away, but there was a lot of trauma in the breakup. My boyfriend at the time was an alcoholic. And, things kind of got violent at the end there, and it was just really bad, and it took me a long time to recover from that. So in answer to your question, I think when I first moved here, I needed some space and time to figure things out for myself, to kind of heal. And as I went through, the years of writing it, I changed as well. So the person that I was from 2000 to 2003 was very different than how I was from 2003 to 2005 and so on. I found that I needed to face some of the vulnerabilities that I was currently facing in New York. There are so many people that live here, and yet you can feel quite lonely here too. So feeling comfortable with myself, feeling comfortable with where my process was going was important. So I do think that as my journey in New York started to progress, I became stronger, and I started to feel that I could write my story and release it.
The other thing was, to someone who hasn't read your book, or who someone has just recently, what is the message that you would like people to take away? What do you want your readers to get out of your story?
So, I wish someone sat me down late 1999 and said, you know what, you're going to be okay. I wish someone told me that, because I think that when you face something really hard or difficult or challenging, you feel really alone. So I wanted to write this story because I wanted to share it with anyone who's gone through the same experience as me. Maybe you've never been to Asia or you've never been to Tibet, but we've all, I think for the most part, been dumped, and it's not a good feeling. We've been rejected, and so there's these commonalities that we all experience and share. So I wanted to write a story about what I went through and how it's going to be okay. And you actually are more than okay. You actually come out stronger as a result of leaving a relationship that you have no business being in. And most importantly, you discover, there is some beauty in some of the suffering, because you learn a little bit more about yourself. You learn that, the strength that you discover within is something that you would never experience unless you go through some trauma. Not that I advocate being dumped, it's not fun, but you learn a lot. So, so a couple things. I would love for anyone who reads this to be inspired to believe that they can overcome any calamity of the heart, and to believe in oneself. And the second thing that I hope a reader would get out of my book is that you should go and travel and see the world and be inspired by the different, cultural exchanges, heartfelt exchanges from your locals.
Great, thank you. There is, yes, one enthusiastic.
I was about a very practical thing about publishing it. You were talking about the time it took. Did you get a literary agent? Did you think of self-publishing? What was the process, the publishing process you went through?
So if I'm hearing correctly, you're asking what the publishing process was. And
what happened to you trying to publish it? Did you have a hard time? Was it easy?
Yeah,
Did you get a literary agent?
Okay, so for me, I felt that I wanted to get my story out there. And I think that, I tried. I really tried to get a publisher to publish my book. And it was a really long journey because it's very, very competitive. I think 2009 was not a very good year to do that. As a result of it being very competitive, more and more authors in New York City or anywhere wanted to get their story out there. So self-publishing has become a huge deal. And as a result of that, a lot of people have taken it very seriously. And I published it through Amazon, it's available that, and I promoted myself. So it did take me 10 years to write it, but it took me a good 2 or 3 years of shopping my book around and then finally deciding to do it on my own. Any other questions?
Did you keep a diary while you were traveling?
Okay, so the question is, did I keep a diary while I was traveling? So I've actually kept a diary all my life, and so when I'm traveling, I especially keep a diary. And it was so interesting because we were talking about this today. We're like, well, how much do you write about, like, your memories, and how much of it is actually written in my journal? So it's a little bit of both. Like I wrote every day in my journal, but it was a lot of the things that I couldn't really chronicle or write about were the feelings I felt at that time. And sometimes when there's a little bit of distance, sometimes those feelings change. And so absolutely, I kept a journal, but a lot of the writing that I put down on paper were just some of the memories that were still very much alive.
So, since you wrote this book, have you been back to Tibet?
Well, I don't know if they'll have me. I have some pretty strong views about Tibet. I have been back to China for work, but no, I have not been back to Tibet, but I have been back to Laos. And it's so interesting, when you visit a place, you have a certain idea or vision of it, and then when you go back, it's actually a little bit different, and so it's just quite interesting to go and revisit back. I do have this policy of mine where I don't like to go back to the same country that I visited. I don't know, just because I have a special place in my heart for it. Matt, yes?
I think the memoir genre and travel memoirs especially have been really popular, especially over the past 10 years or so, and even going back further. Were there any particular authors or books within this sort of universe that you look to for inspiration, or in terms of format, or just writing style, or anything like that?
Great, so you're asking about authors that inspired me along the way. Yeah. So when I moved here in 2000, I didn't know a soul, and I was really quite lonely, so I read a lot. And I started reading a lot of memoir. And I think there's a really good book by Francine Prose called Reading Like a Writer. And I think if you want to be a really good writer, you need to read a lot. Because I think you get really inspired by not only writing style, but the way people see things, their perspectives. So in early 2000 to 2003, 2004, I read a lot. I probably read like a book a week. Some aspiring authors that I really love are Jane Hamilton, Map of the World, Anne-Marie MacDonald, the Canadian author, Francine Prose. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, wow, doesn't your book sound a little bit like Elizabeth Gilbert's Eat, Pray, Love? Well, interestingly enough, when her book first came out, I was asked that question a lot. He said, oh, were you inspired by her? Well, actually, I had already written my book, and then her book came out. And I'm really proud that she has kind of paved the way for travel memoir. It's a genre of literature that was not really celebrated before until she, came through. And by the way, she's an excellent author. Great. Any other questions? Paul?
All the journals. When you finish your memoir, were you able to get rid of those journals? I'm asking that for personal reason. All those
Oh, those journals. You know, it's interesting. A lot of the journals that I've kept are sitting in a closet somewhere. And I think they will remain there. However, I do have a blog, for those of you who are interested in my blog. I have actually took out some of my journals and started writing different travel stories from that, just to kind of bring that up again. And I have something in my blog called 52 Travel Stories. I write one very short travel story every week, and if you subscribe to my blog, you can get that. Are there questions? Yes, Renee?
What's the next book?
What's the next book? I don't know. You know, someone asked me that the other day, and I don't know if there's another book, because I think it took me so long, and I think I'm in a new stage right now. But if there is a new book, I'll definitely let you know.
There's no pressure.
No pressure. Anyone else? Yes.
I was wondering if you have any advice for aspiring authors and just sort of how you balance your job and your time.
Yeah, you know, I wish I didn't have to work. I know all my colleagues are back there. and I'm in human resources too, and I know I shouldn't say that. But, I wish I could be a full-time author. That would be so cool. But I do need to work. I do have a day job. It's two pieces of advice. One is never stop reading, because I think reading is so important. And being able to keep your mind sharp as to what other styles are out there and different perspectives on life. The second thing is join a writing group. And okay, I mean, to be honest, there are some weirdos out there. You want to be sure that the people that you connect with are people that you trust. And I was very fortunate to belong to 2 writing groups. And so when you join a writing group, you meet regularly and you share your writing. And if you're open to that, because it requires a certain amount of vulnerability, then it allows you to help change and morph your writing to be even better. So I highly recommend that you join a writing group. And a writing group can just be 2 people. So I hope I answered your question. We have time for one more question. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you tell me how you came to the title of The Same Sky?
Great. Well, actually, we are good segue. We are. My last reading actually addresses that, so I'll hold to that. I'll take one last question. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you plan on having a Chinese version of it?
A Chinese version? I don't know. My mom asked me that the other day. I was like, oh. I don't know yet, but that is a good question. Thank you.
Okay. Well, just to thank you, everybody, and just to end the Q&A, I wanted to ask Debbie, one of my favorite passages in the book is near the end of the story, and it's when Debbie shares quite a painful story from her family's history. But maybe you could share that with the group as our last reading.
Yeah, and actually reveal why we call the Same Sky.
Yes, and it answers your question as well.
Okay. Okay, very interesting questions. And by the way, I'm very open to answering any questions afterwards, or especially for you aspiring authors. I'm very open to answering any questions. So the name of the book is called The Same Sky, and for obvious reasons, you can probably imagine why I call it The Same Sky. I think that no matter where you go, we all share the same sky, and there's a lot of very universal themes that we all share, in terms of the human spirit, even though we're very different culturally, or we're different in terms of language or geography. So that's one reason why I call it The Same Sky. Another reason why I call it The Same Sky, which I'm going to segue into this reading, is my mother's version, or my mother's idea about what the sky is. And I remember when I was growing up in Vancouver, Canada, my mom loved to garden, and she would look up at the sky and be thinking about things. And so what ensued was an interesting dialogue about that. And she would talk about the ghosts that follow you sometimes. And in my case at that time, going through a breakup that was really traumatic, that was my ghost. Even though I went to all these different countries, it followed me wherever I went. And the one thing that I found the most important about my journey was not to run away, but to actually face it. I remember meeting this woman in Laos whose entire family was, almost her entire family was killed during during some warfare, some residual effect from the Vietnam War. And she was sharing, when she was a little girl, that she would see, dead bodies lying on the road and, seeing some of her family members just suffering. And she would say, what do? Stay beside death and cry? No, you keep going, you move on. And I remember saying to her, you mean to forget about it? She was never to forget. You move on so that you learn from it and that you become stronger as a result of it. It's actually easier to wallow in your pain, but it's actually stronger to face it in order to let it go. So it's a lot of very interesting themes as a result of that. So my piece that I want to share with you now is just a piece about what my mother views as the sky, and ultimately the conclusion to the end of my book. I looked up at the blueness overhead, streaked with fiery orange, and wondered if my mother was staring up at the sky too. Perhaps at that moment she was in her garden, her pride and joy, gazing up at the Vancouver sky as she moved from the bok choy section to the green onions. I could imagine her now, bending down, carefully massaging the dirt, and then standing up to survey the beautiful work, her eyes blank and infinite. One time when I was 7 years old, helping my mother pull weeds from her garden, I had asked questions about China and her village for the first time. My mother, who had lived in Guangdong province all her life before immigrating to Canada in the 60s, told me that everything was always different in another country. The food, the air, the people. What about the sky, I asked. My mother shook her head, the dark perm curls bouncing for a second. She gave me an odd look. No, it looks the same. Sun, clouds, Genjin, yeah. It follows you wherever you go. What you see above reminds you of what you should remember, and they stay with you. I was confused. What follows you? Like what? But my mother's hardened face just turned away. Was she thinking about her old life in China, or the people she left behind? Maybe she was thinking about her own mother, who died when she was only 5 years old. Ghosts, people I used to know, she finally said. Like your mother, I asked? She nodded and then turned her back to me as I continued to yank the weeds out with my small fists. I was braver back then to ask such a question. It had been a silent rule around the house that we were never to discuss Grandma unless our mother brought it up first, which wasn't often. She never liked to talk about the plight of our grandmother, and it was only our father who filled in the gaps of the story. For days, the entire village was afraid as story after story of the communists coming to clean house filtered through the tiny provincial pocket of Guangdong. It was 1949, after the Kuomintang was defeated. They had deserted their post and fled to Taiwan. Communist troops were ordered to establish command at every village, town, and city. My grandmother, being the wealthiest woman in the village, was afraid for her life. After all, she was alone. Her husband was in Hong Kong, starting up an herbal business, and was sending money back to her on a monthly basis. The plan was that after a year or so, he would send for her and the children. In the meantime, she had to sit tight. Then one morning, she brought my mother and my Uncle Peter to the shores of the river. Crying and singing a lullaby to soothe her children, my grandmother stuffed money into their tiny pockets. She disappeared among the sugarcane stalks, and on the other side of them, waded out into the water, the strong current taking her frail body downstream. The two children observed her black head bobbing up and down until it was a dot in the distance. My mother didn't know how long she had waited. It was only until fishermen noticed two small children on the shore, steadfast, eyes yearning, waiting for someone who would never come back. One day tumbled into the next until grandmother's body washed up on the shore of the next village. Just clothes, bones, and her ring remained. The villagers took pity on my mother and her brother, and a neighbor who already had 6 children adopted them. A year later, they were sent to Hong Kong to live with their father. The communists never did come looking for my grandmother after all. But it was over, I reminded my mother, during the rare times she talked about Grandma. Then how do you account for the nightmares, she asked me. Let me tell you what I see sometimes in my dreams. It had come in the form of darkness that crept up along the banks of the river where she and her brother had stood over 30 years ago. She eyed my grandmother's graceful figure in the distance with a black cape that was her shadow. Then she disappeared into the sugarcane field, the tangling branches low enough to cover her face. Just a glimpse. These were the images she saw over and over again since that fateful day. Years later, in 1984, after moving to Hong Kong and then eventually to Canada, my mother went back to her village for the first time. She stood on the embankment and remembered everything. The current of the water, the gentle swaying of the sugar canes nearby, and the clear turquoise sky above her. After asking the other villages, she soon discovered that her mother's burial site was only a few feet away from where she and her brother had been left on the shore. They hired men to dig up the bones and reburied my grandmother, on a beautiful, peaceful spot alongside the mountain. After that, my mother's nightmares ceased. Like my mother, I faced my own ghosts and the fears of being alone. And like her, I didn't let the roots of my anger toward Christophe overrun me completely, or let my pain stage my hope in people again. Now, at the end of my journey, I've arrived at peace. And the peace had come from going deep within and discovering that solace didn't come from physical places or even from another person granting you that peace. It was the kind of peace that's earned, inspired by those around me, like the Tibetans, Laotians, and Cambodians, who had experienced grief far deeper than mine and yet still carried on, because they had to, as I must. Christophe's ghost had followed me through the Himalayan mountains in Tibet, to the beaches of Thailand, and the lonely temples in Laos. And while his ghost passed through me, I had met wonderful locals with their beautiful smiles and stories that distracted me, giving me a portal into their lives. They had given me a glimpse of life again, showed me that the world was bigger than I imagined, and that inspiration could be felt in the simplest of gestures. Despite the differences in language, culture, and food, we were all under the same sky, bound by the commonalities of the human spirit, kindness, grief, heartache, and hope that transcended any border, political regime, or cultural boundaries. At the heart of it all, we were the same. Thank you. So, a couple things before we end. As you can see, all of you coming here has been so encouraging and so wonderful. And I want to say there's going to be future readings. I would love to invite you guys to future readings, not only about the same sky, but other travel writers who can share some of their stories. And like I said, we would love to invite you to that, but we'll continue to have that here in New York City. And if we can, I would love to bring back my Mom Wong dialogue. My Mom Wong show is a one-woman dialogue where I describe my mom sharing the difficulties of immigrating to Canada. And I do it through her. I actually go through this one-woman monologue describing how she's feeling. And, it's a really poignant yet touching and funny dialogue that I would love for you to see. And it's interesting because, I really can relate to this because my mom, growing up in China and then immigrating to Canada, faced that huge cultural divide that she had with us daughters. And in this dialogue, or this monologue, she would, share this. I remember growing up feeling the pressure of, trying to be much better than the Chinese family that lived next door to us. There's so much pressure to be better than all the other Chinese families in the neighborhood. We always had to be going to a better school or, playing the piano better and all that, for those of you who can relate to that. And I remember growing up, my mom used to say, make sure you marry loyal, a doctor. No loose face, one. She used to say that. And, being 20 years old, I was really cheeky, and I said, wow, what's the big deal? I really would love to marry an artist one day. And she's like, oh my God, you crazy, artist, crazy. I said, what's wrong with an artist? And my mom used to say, maybe he read many books, draw many pictures, but no food on table, Mom. So she used to say that. And so yes, we would love to welcome you to see the Mom Wong monologue. And finally, I want to say thank you for all of you guys for coming. And I want to also thank my husband, Eduardo, who has been very patient throughout this whole journey. And I have to say that I dedicated my book to him, and if you have my book, you'll see on the second page that I said this is dedicated to Eduardo, who has shown me that love is possible again. And throughout this whole process of facing myself and being stronger as a result of that, I feel so lucky and fortunate to have met someone who has allowed me to be vulnerable, allowed me to open up. So I feel very fortunate about that. So thanks everyone, and we are going to have a book signing, and you're welcome to buy the book here. You don't have to buy it here, you can buy it on Amazon, you can get a soft cover version, whatever you want. Thank you so much for coming out.